Thank you for joining us today for another webinar in our Market Access and International Approval webinar series. My name is Yuna and part of the certification and approvals technical staff here at Vista Compliance Laboratories. Today I will be presenting to you the certification and approval regulations, as well as the technical requirements for electrical equipment, electronics, and wireless product and device approval in Central America. Vista Laboratories is an EMC and RF compliance test lab and product certification body, and we are experts in global regulatory approvals for radio frequency devices. So today we'll be going over the requirements for radio frequency and telecommunications approval in Central America. In this webinar, we will provide an overview of the major topics necessary to understand to get your radio device on the right track for authorization and distribution in Central America. These are the 6 countries we will be going over for Central America and their associated type approval authorities. That will be Belize, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, Nicaragua, and Panama. Today we'll be going over the type approval process and some of the requirements for type approval in these countries. Most of the countries do have very similar requirements, such as acceptance of FCC or CE reports or recognition of the FCC or CE label, but there are some minor differences in terms of exemptions. Today we'll be going over some of these details and hopefully get started on type approval for these countries for your products. So let's first begin with Belize and the Public Utilities Commission. The Public Utilities Commission (PUC) of Belize is the regulatory body in the telecommunications industry. The telecom sector of the PUC ensures compatibility of all telecommunication, broadcasting, and radio communication equipment with the public switch telecommunications network through their type approval procedures. This includes regulatory compliance requirements related to the frequency spectrum and telecommunication infrastructure for most consumer electronics. The Public Utilities Commission grants and regulates telecom and wireless approvals. In the most cases, they will accept regulatory test reports from other countries to be submitted as proof of compliance, such as FCC or CE-RED compliance reports. No person or entity is permitted to import, install, make, or sell, or use or operate any equipment in Belize per the regulation of the PUC, unless granted a permit for the equipment. All products that utilize radio frequency and cellular technologies require PUC type approval and certification before import and commercialization. All telecommunication and radio frequency equipment must be granted a permit by the Public Utilities Commission prior to import, installation, sale, or use operation. Users of certain telecommunications equipment must be obtained a license from the PUC as required by law for the operation of such equipment. For products that do not require approval, the agency will provide an exemption letter signifying that no TA is required to have for your records so as to avoid any issues with customs upon importation of your equipment to Belize. Taking a look at some of the type approval required under the PUC permits, such as receivers, transceivers, walkie-talkie, drones, and so. And these are some of the radio receivers and transceivers that are regulated under the PUC permit, such as radio frequency amplifier, phone patch system, radio broadcasting transmitters, television broadcasting transmitting, radio frequency transmitting antenna, radio broadcasting transmitting antenna, walkie-talkie, and drones. Now let's moving on. It's still under the PUC permit satellite communication equipment, low noise amplifiers, receivers, modulators, very small aperture terminals, receiving or transmitting antenna, encoders, decoders, feed horns, and telecommunication equipment, customer permissive equipment excluding regular telephone, cordless telephone, cellular telephone, and all other telecommunication and CPE connecting to any licensed telecom provider network. And last on the regulated type approval list PUC permit is electrical magnetic radiating devices. It includes industrial and laboratory electric equipment, induction and dielectric heating equipment, remote radio control equipment, radar equipment, and electrical magnetical apparatus. Users of certain telecommunications equipment must also obtain a license from the PUC as required by law. So the type approval list of telecom and radio equipment for PUC license, this is not exhaustive. Land mobile radio transceivers, marine radio transceivers, satellite TV systems, Internet satellite system, not registered through local Internet service provider, amateur radio operators, citizen band radio operators, aircraft radios, point-to-point links, including external Wi-Fi data network, domestic private networks, paging system, vehicle location system. Users of certain telecommunications equipment must also obtain a license from the PUC as required by law of the operation of such equipment. All telecommunication and radio frequency equipment must be granted a permit by the Public Utilities Commission prior to import, installation, sale, or use operation. PUC issued permit is mandatory requirement. There are no requirements in Belize for local testing, marking, and labeling, or a local in-country representative, and the certificate remains valid as long as the product remains unchanged. Approval times can range from 4 to 12 weeks, but typically are completed in less than 6 weeks. Documentation needed: manufacturer or dealer application for approval, technical files, product specs, operational description, user manual, FCC and/or CE test reports, type approval certificate or letter from country of origin. Other forms of type approval by other country authorities or certification schemes may be accepted at the discretion of the PUC. Approval agreement and authorities. Testing. In-country testing is not required. Sample may be requested for verification. Local rep is not required. Lead time includes testing of the samples of equipment, reviewing the application, and granting the type approval for equipment. It usually takes around 3 to 6 weeks for CPE, customer permissive equipment, up to 12 weeks for switches and other high-capacity equipment. Validity. There's no expiration. For renews, not required unless product has been modified. In general, the PUC needs to advise the change to determine if a new TA is required. Family model grouping. Yes, if using the same radio module and are identical in terms of RF characteristics. Modular approval. Yes. There are labeling requirements for products, including FCC and CE labels, but no unique marking is needed. Suppliers must have systems in place for efficient equipment maintenance and take reasonable measures to ensure timely repair or replacement. The PUC may issue directives to suppliers if customer complaints are received, and suppliers must respond within 28 days. Customs will seize equipment that does not meet certification requirements for Belize. An unlicensed device may result in fines of 10,000 Belize dollars or 5,000 USD, and licensed device may result in fines of up to 500,000 Belize as well as imprisonment. So just to come back to the brief over, we just went over Belize and we have 5 more countries to go. Next up is Costa Rica, and the regulatory body is SUTEL. SUTEL is the telecommunications regulating agency in Costa Rica. Products that use radio frequency and cellular technologies will require approval and certification to import and commercialization in Costa Rica. They are in charge of managing the radio frequency spectrum, and they issue approvals for telecom equipment. They also accept some reports and grants as proof of compliance for non-cellular device, but for cellular device, in-country testing is required. Some example of what SUTEL regulates would be cellular devices, RFID, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth radio products. So, there are 2 main methods for type approval in Costa Rica under SUTEL. Approval for mobile terminals, the cellular devices. Regulation RCS/358/2018, which superseded Regulation Number RCS/332/2013 and came into effect on 10th December 2018. This is a new standard added to the field of testing for cellular products and provides additional guidelines for RF and battery performance tests. This applies to cellular equipment. Free band approval, regulations RCS/154/2018, which superseded regulation number RCS/431/2010 and came into effect on May 3, 2018. The update here includes update to account for modular and family certification. This now includes modular certification. There will be the possibility of certifying different devices that share the same module as long as differences between the devices are mainly authentic. And also if the module is the only part of the equipment that makes use of the radio spectrum. In addition, family certification will be possible if the manufacturer declares by a letter that all familiar devices have the same characteristics as the device for which documentation was provided in terms of brand, hardware, and software version, frequencies of operation, output power, electric field strengths, and antenna's power gain. Also, previously only WLAN was listed so far, but now many applications like RFID, short-range device, and radars have been added. Any changes to existing or development of additional hardware version of an already approved cellular device will require an update to the current certificate. It remains the case that any updates to the software version of an already approved cellular device requires an update effort. Labeling is only accepted in the form of a physical affixed label on the device, or an e-label which must be accessible through the menu of the device. For physical labels, the label must be made of a durable material and must be declared to SUTEL at the point of applying for type approval. Market surveillance will be enforced to ensure the compliance of the above labeling requirements. It is not known at this stage how this will be enforced between SUTEL and Costa Rica Customs, and when this will be implemented. Okay, so now we will take a look at a free band approval which will not require any in-country testing. So one of the main updates for the regulated frequency approval is the additional regulated frequency band. On the left is before the modification of Addendum 7. After the modification of Addendum 7 is on the right with more frequency bands available. Basically, only WLAN was listed so previously, but now many applications like RFID, short-range device, and radars have been added. So I hope that was helpful for determining which approval schemes will be good for your products and some of the updated standards. Now we will be moving on to the specific type approval requirements necessary to get the certificate and some of the responsibilities after for the supplier. The technical documentation must have the hardware and software version of the product. SUTEL accepts and prefers FCC reports, but may accept CE report in some cases. Label because if device uses cellular frequencies, SUTEL requests label show model, brand, IMEI frequency. For renewal, any approval issued under the older standards are still in compliance, but any updates, including software or hardware version updates, will require a certificate update. For family model, same characteristics as the device for which documentation was provided, brand, hardware, and software version, frequencies of operation, output power, electric field strengths, and antenna's power gain. Modular approval is allowed. Applications for modular certification have to contain a data sheet of the end device in which the module will be integrated. So moving on to supplier responsibilities. In terms of product label, product marking, it must be affixed onto product, permanent and legible, may be printed in black and white. E-labeling is allowed. No restriction on material used for the label. There are two options for the SUTEL label. You can have the colorful SUTEL logo with the type approval and year label on the left, or the black and white label on the right with the type approval and year. The General Quality Directorate conducts inspection to verify compliance with the requirements. Penalties in the case of non-compliance. So Costa Rica did have some in-country testing required for cellular device. Moving on to the other countries, I believe they do not have any in-country testing requirements. Next up, we will be talking about SIGET, the Type Approval Authority of El Salvador. SIGET is the government regulating body tasked with managing the electricity generation and telecommunications infrastructure and industry in El Salvador, including radio spectrum usage and assignments for the specific frequency from 3 kHz to 3000 GHz range. SIGET accepts CE-RED reports as proof of compliance for telecom and wireless products, allowing for their legal importation into the country, as well as FCC reports. Products that utilize radio frequency, cellular, or satellite technology require approval and certification in order to commercialize in El Salvador. Some examples are Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, RFID, radar, satellite telecommunications. Okay, so quickly going over some approval requirements pertaining to SIGET in El Salvador. Again, FCC CE, product specifications, operational description, user menu, label example, internal and external photos. In-country testing is not required. Sample may be requested for verification. It's not common though. Local representative is not required. Lead time usually around 4 to 8 weeks. There's no expiration on the certification for validity, so it does not expire. For renewal and new type approval, not required unless product has been modified. Family model grouping normally is not allowed, but it can based on FCC or CE approval. Modular approval, yes, based on FCC and CE. If it's modular approval for FCC, then it's allowed to the same for SIGET. Labeling, FCC and CE label is accepted by SIGET in El Salvador. Okay, so that about sum it up for some of the basic requirements for El Salvador. Most of these countries do not have special label requirement, and most of them will accept FCC and CE labels, though it always advised to have those labels on your products. Move on to Guatemala SIT. The SIT of Guatemala manages and supervises the use of the radio spectrum, maintains the telecommunication registry, applies cessation as necessary under the General Telecommunications Law, and liaises with International Communications Organization. While there is no specific requirement for prior approval of imported electronic equipment under the General Telecommunications Law of Guatemala, it is possible to request SIT approval by submitting a letter of inquiry and technical specification to the agency. Many wireless telecom products, including indoor Wi-Fi devices with transmitted power output less than 500 milliwatts, are exempt from notification to SIT. However, for transmitting outdoors or in regulated bands like 2.4 GHz and 5.8 GHz, it is advisable to obtain SIT approval or provide proof of compliance with CE or FCC test reports from other countries. In some cases, an exemption letter or notice may still be required to confirm that no type approval is necessary for a specific device prior to import or sale. Nonetheless, SIT accepts FCC and CE test reports as evidence of compliance. SIT type approval requirements for Guatemala looking at the documentation, product specification, schematics, user menu, FCC or CE test reports, label example, internal or external photos. You can still apply for exemption. For testing, in-country testing is not required. Local representative is also not required. Lead time will usually take up to 3 to 6 weeks. Renewals is not required unless product has been modified. For labeling, FCC and CE label is accepted. Next, we will be moving on to CONATEL in Honduras. CONATEL is the primary state agency responsible for executing telecommunications policy in the Republic of Honduras, mainly through regulation and coordination. Among its foundations, functions. CONATEL issues the necessary regulations and technical standard for the provision of telecommunication service. CONATEL also grants authorizations, permits, registrations, and licenses for the provision of telecommunication services, and in accordance with relevant regulations, may renew, modify, declare their expiration date, or revoke them. Furthermore, CONATEL accepts and recognizes certificates from various international bodies, including the FCC, CE, IFETEL, and TELEC, indicating compliance with technical regulations and standards. Requirements here are similar for the most part of the other country. FCC and CE documents are accepted. In-country testing is not required. There is no local rep necessary or specific labels. Lead time usually around 6 to 12 weeks. Next, we will be going over Nicaragua's Telcor. Telcor is the agency in Nicaragua responsible for regulating telecommunication equipment, wireless products, equipment that connects to the PSTN, along with other types of device require type approval and certification in Nicaragua. Some of the devices that are regulated are wireless gateways, satellite equipment, telephones, and fax machines. So the approval requirements here. No in-country testing is required, and we may use existing international test reports for the homologation process to obtain the Telcor approval. Local representative is not required in Nicaragua, and there are no country-specific labeling requirements that apply. For renewals or new type approval, that is not required unless product has been modified. The validation, there's no expiration time, and the lead time usually is around 4 to 8 weeks. Now let's move on to the final country, Panama, which is ASEP. ASEP is the telecommunications regulating agency in Panama. They not only control telecommunications products, they also control the drinking water, sanitation, electricity, as well as telecom, radio, and television. Products that use radio frequency technology requires ASEP type approval and certification to import and commercialize in Panama. Some of the devices that are regulated are transceivers, personal trackers, wireless microphones, mobile phones, RFID equipment, and radio alarms. Panama does have some exemptions for type approval for certain types of equipment. This includes terminal equipment and any other device used to access the networks of communication service providers, as well as broadcasting and television transmitting equipment, passive components of transmission systems such as antennas, filters, and lines of transmission, and also exempt from type approval. The regulatory entity may also determine other equipment that is exempt from type approval through a future resolution. These exemptions allow for easier importation and commercialization of equipment in Panama, provided they fall within the categories of exempt equipment as determined by the regulatory entity. So the approval requirements here are: no in-country testing is required, and we may use existing international test report for the homologation process to obtain the ASEP approval. ASEP will perform technical analysis and evaluate the specifications of the device and its compliance with established regulation on the use of radio spectrum, especially those contained in the National Plan of Frequency Allocation and/or sectoral resolutions. Local representation is not required in Panama, and there are no country-specific labeling requirements that apply. Validity, there's no expiration time, and the lead time usually around 4 to 8 weeks. So that sums it up for all the countries in Central America and their type approval authorities. I hope we were able to cover important information, and I hope you were able to get an understanding of the different countries' requirements in Central America. This concludes our webinar of the Central America Market Access, Certifications, and Approval for Electrical Equipment and Wireless Products. I hope this webinar was helpful for you in understanding the process for approval and certifications, as well as what requirements are applicable to your products. Vista Compliance Lab specializes in certifications, approvals, and compliance testing for electrical and radio frequency devices. We are a 17025 accredited EMC RF compliance test lab and a 17065 accredited product certification body. We are a telecommunications certification body in the US, Canada, EU, Hong Kong, Singapore, and Japan. And we provide certification and approvals for all products type in countries all over the world. If you'd like to stay in touch with regulatory updates, follow us online. And if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions on the information presented today or any general inquiries, you can reach us anytime at info@vista/compliance.com. Thank you for your time and have a wonderful day.